Hello, Realty One Group agents. Tim Kelly here. I'm going to do a short video, as short as I can, on the Buyer Broker Representation Agreement, the BBRA. I'm going to go through the entire document, read every sentence, and make recommendations on, as of now, September 2024. Today is September 18th, I'm sorry, to be exact, on what we recommend you put on this form, but ultimately it's up to you. Buyer Brokerage Representation Agreement. This agreement is designed to allow a buyer to engage a qualified licensed professional for the purpose of viewing property and receiving contract negotiation and advocacy services throughout the entire real estate offer and purchase process for the type of properties described below. Now, when you meet your client, are you going to work with them exclusively, or are you going to allow them to work with more than one broker? Ultimately, it's your decision and theirs, but if they've already met with a broker and they've signed one of these, you have to find out if it's exclusive or non-exclusive. Of course, we prefer exclusive. Now, number one, properties. The undersigned buyer engages the undersigned brokerage firm to represent buyer concerning buyer's purchase of the below selected real properties types situated in the following locations. Any real property introduced to buyer by broker in the geographical area shall be referred to as the property. So this is your first area that you have to fill out. If typically you're going to check off residential 99% of the time, but you might have an investor, okay, and you'll check off an investment. If it's commercial, then you have to come to your manager and get that approved. You're probably going to have to work with one of our commercial agents if your buyer is in the area of something commercial, because you're not licensed and qualified to do that yet. Vacant land is fine, custom is fine, and new home is fine, okay? So the more you check off on here, probably the better, just to be on the safe side, but predominantly it's going to be residential and new home. Applicable cities. I would recommend you put in here Clark County, all of Clark County, the entire area of Clark County. That typically it covers everything, just in case they when you meet them, they may say, I want to live in Henderson, and then 2 weeks into it, oh no, that's a great home you sent me in Summerlin, Tim, and then your agreement becomes a little out of whack. So I would just put, instead of applicable cities, I would just put Clark County, Nevada. Other description. If they are being specific, they want a zip code, they want a specific type of property, you would put that under other description, but for the most part, that's going to be left blank. Or if you're meeting them only for a weekend, you haven't met them yet, they called you on the phone, they want to see some properties Saturday and Sunday, they're driving up from California, you're going to see 2 or 3 homes. That's where you could put in those specific addresses if that's going to be the case, okay? Number 2, length of agreement. Subject to Section 14, and we'll get to that. This agreement begins on the date last signed by the buyer and broker and automatically ends on, this is where you're going to put a date, or upon the closing of a transaction, whichever is later. Meaning, are you going to work with them for 2 weeks, for 30 days, for 90 days, for a year? In your conversation, in your buyer's consultation with your client, you're going to determine how long that agreement should be for. I would recommend 30 days, maybe even 2 weeks. Get a feel for them, they get a feel for you. It's important, okay? I would never put on here, 365 days. That's ridiculous, okay? First of all, it shouldn't take you that long to help them find the property. So I'm thinking 2 weeks, 30 days, maybe even 90 days. That should suffice for the time being. Number 3, the broker fee. Buyer agrees to pay broker as provided below for any properties involving the broker's efforts under Section 6. The broker fee is not set by law or by any realtor association and is fully negotiable. The broker fee is, check those that apply. 9 out of 10 times, you're going to check off this box and put in a percentage. 2, 2.5%, 3%. That's a number that will represent the value you represent to your buyer that you feel you should earn for the services you're going to render for that buyer. The second box, exactly, would be if instead of a percentage, you put a dollar amount. Okay, my flat fee, Mr. Buyer, is $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, whatever you think that should be. We don't necessarily recommend that. A percentage is really a truer way to get compensated. So 2 or 3% of the sales price is typically what you're going to use. And number 3, the third box, is if you want to put in your transaction fee there of $600 or $800. You can do that on this form, and then over here you put to be paid towards buyer's transaction fee. So that's how number 3 works. Now below number 3 is very important. Let me get out of this so I can scroll. Right here, the broker fee is due and payable upon successful closing. If buyer enters into an agreement to purchase any properties shown to them by the licensee within blank days following the expiration or earlier cancellation of this agreement, then buyer shall pay the broker fee to broker upon closing. The broker fee shall be in U.S. currency paid at the time, and as a condition of closing, this agreement shall act as escrow instructions for payment of the broker fee. This section 3 shall survive the expiration of the early cancellation of this agreement. What this means, very important. Let's say up here, your number 2, you put 30 days. So you meet them September 1st, it expires October 1st, they go their separate ways. Your agreement is over, they don't want to renew it with you, and you move on to your next client. If you put, as an example, where we have here on number 3, say 90 days, that means any properties that you've shown them in that 30-day window, which was the length of your contract with them, your BBRA contract term was 30 days, up to 90 days after it expires, if they go back and make an offer on one of those properties, you're entitled to your commission. So it's very important you keep good notes, write down what properties you saw with what client, what day, what time. It doesn't happen often, but a month or 2 might go by, and that buyer sees that property still on the market, finds another agent, and that agent shows it to them, you're still entitled to your commission. Okay, so kind of keep that in mind. As we go down to page 2, number 4, collecting broker's fee from the seller. Buyer may choose to negotiate that the broker fee to be paid in whole or in part by the seller as a credit to the buyer at closing, or by the seller directly to the broker at closing. At buyer's instruction, broker will include either or both of these in the buyer's offer to the property, and broker will help buyer negotiate with a seller. Broker will not retain any amount from any source that exceeds the amount agreed above. So again, if you put, say, 2 or 2.5 or 3% on number 3, that's the most you're going to get paid. You cannot get paid more than that. But what number 4 says, and when you're explaining it to your buyer, Mr. Buyer, my goal is to have you pay none of my commission. As you know, for many years, everything was paid by the seller, but now the rules have changed, okay? And I don't necessarily agree with them, but we have to play by these new rules. And what number 4 is saying is I'm going to do everything I can when I make that offer for you to negotiate in the offer my commission to be paid by the seller. So again, that's another value add that you're explaining to your buyer, that your job is not necessarily to collect money from them. You're going to try to get your fee from the seller. Number 5, disclosures. A, buyer understands that depending on the circumstances, it may be necessary or appropriate for the broker to act as an agent of both sides for each such transaction. In such event, broker will seek buyer's consent to broker's representation of additional parties as soon as practicable and will obtain written consent to act form signed by both parties. Very important. What that means is you have a buyer and you happen to get a listing a week or 2 into working with this buyer, and that buyer is attracted to that listing, and you go show it to them. Okay, you need permission from all parties to represent both parties. Okay, we do it all the time. It's very common, but you need to do it properly and get permission from buyer, from seller, and that's where this form called the consent to act form comes into play. When you come to that roadblock, make sure you come to your manager and we will walk you through it. And 5B, buyer consents and acknowledges that other potential buyers represented by the broker may consider, make offers on or acquire interest in the same or similar properties. Number 6, broker's efforts right here. Broker will exercise good faith efforts to A, locate and represent suitable properties to the buyer, B, tour and prepare detailed analysis of specific properties per buyer's request, C, help buyer prepare, negotiate, and secure a contract to purchase one or more properties, D, cooperate with any real estate licensee working with the seller to facilitate and complete the buyer's purchase of the property, and E, perform other services as needed and requested by the broker. So these are some of the things that you've already told the buyer in your buyer consultation what you're going to be doing for them. This just reiterates a handful of them, okay? Now the buyer's representation and duty. So this part says what you're going to do. This says what the buyer's going to do. Buyer agrees to work exclusively with the broker and not with any other broker unless marked otherwise on page 1. B, buyer agrees to furnish broker with all relevant data, records, documents, and other information including loan pre-approval letters and proof of funds to purchase upon request of broker, and authorize broker to furnish copies to prospective sellers, landlords, optioners, and exchangers. C. Buyer agrees to be available to examine properties and in responding in a timely manner to communications from the broker. D. Buyer agrees to act in good faith to acquire the property and conduct any and all inspections of the property that the buyer deems material and or important. And E. New home / lot sales. Some sellers, particularly new home subdivisions, open houses, and for sale by owners, will not compensate broker unless broker makes the first visit with the buyer. If buyer makes a visit without the broker, buyer agrees to compensate the broker as stated in Section 3, broker fee. 7E is very important. During your consultation with the buyer, you're going to make it crystal clear that if they want to go see a new home, okay, they need to call you first, and you will meet them at the new home. You will go and preview the new home. You will meet the sales agent at the new home in advance of going there with your client. Very important. If they walk into Lennar or Toll Brothers and buy that house during this agreement window of time, you're entitled to go get compensation from them. It's a sticky situation. You don't want that to happen. So during your buyer's consultation, make it very clear that you're here not just to send them or help them purchase a home on MLS. It's for anything that they see online or for a sell by owner, an open house, a new home, whatever it might be. You have to make that clear in your buyer consultation with them. Okay. Number 8, for best experience, buyer is encouraged to be accompanied by broker on buyer's first visit to the property and to conduct all negotiations for the property in good faith and exclusively through broker. Buyer understands that signing more than one buyer broker representation agreement of any overlapping period of time could expose the buyer to liability for paying additional fees. Buyer is not party to any active, exclusive buyer broker representation. Buyer is party to blank, insert a number, active or non-exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. So when you meet the buyer during your consultation, one of the first things you'll want to know is, Mr. Buyer, have you met any other agents? Oh, you have? Okay. Have you signed an agreement with them? Well, maybe, I'm not sure. Dig in. You need to find out what they signed. Very, very important what number 8 is talking about. Number 9, equal housing opportunity. It is the policy of the broker to abide by all state, local, and federal laws prohibiting discrimination against any individual or group of individuals. The broker has no duty to disclose the racial, ethnic, or religious composition of any neighborhood, community, or building, nor whether persons with disabilities are housed in any other home or facility, except that the agent may identify housing facilities meeting the needs of a disabled buyer. Number 10, wire transfer warning. Electronic means of transferring money, EFT, ETF, wire transfer, electronic check, direct deposit, are subject to sophisticated cyber fraud attacks. These attacks are even more prevalent in real estate transactions due to the large sums of money being exchanged. Buyer is advised that brokerage will not provide electronic transfer instructions by email. Very important, gang. You will never email wiring instructions to your client. They only come from the title company, okay? Buyer agrees that if the buyer uses or authorizes the use of electronic transfer funds in a transaction, buyer hereby holds the brokerages, their agents, and the designated title and escrow companies harmless for any and all claims arising out of the inaccurate transfer instructions, fraudulent interception of said funds, and any other damage relating to the conduct of the third parties influencing the transfer process of stealing funds. And also during your consultation, and once you move forward with this client, we have a separate disclosure that you will present to the buyer about cyber fraud to make them even more aware of it. So this is the first mention of it when you meet with them in the BBRA. You're going to mention it to them again in a separate full-page disclosure so they're aware that this could possibly happen. Okay, number 11, this agreement is executed in Nevada, and the laws of the state of Nevada will govern its interpretation and effect. The parties agree that Nevada and the county in which the property is located is the appropriate forum for any arbitration related to this agreement. Okay, page 3 of the BBRA, authorization capacity. Buyer warrants that the buyer has the legal capacity, full power, and authority to enter into this agreement and consummate the transaction contemplated here on the buyer's own behalf or on behalf of the party buyer represents. All buyers executing this agreement are jointly and severally liable for the performance of its terms. Buyer's obligation to pay broker is binding upon buyer and buyer's heirs, administrators, executives, successors, and assignees. Okay? Number 13 is really important. It's blank, additional terms. Leave it blank for now. We are a month into these forms. It's September of 2024. The forms came out at the end of August of 2024. We're not sure what you can or can't put in there right now. So if you do want to put something different in there, I don't know what you would want to put in there, but you got an idea of some wording you want to put in there, run it by your manager first before you type it in there and have your client sign it. Okay? Cancellation, number 14, either party may cancel this agreement effect upon delivery of written notice to the other party unless buyer is under contract to purchase the property. In other words, you can cancel them, they can cancel you by an email. Maybe even a text. A text is kind of like written notice, but we prefer an email. So keep in mind that you could be working with these people for 3 weeks. Okay, you have a 6-month agreement. All of a sudden they send you an email. Sorry, Tim, we don't want to work with you anymore. Move on. The party's over. Okay, it is what it is. Below this, by signing below, the buyer and broker agrees to the terms set forth in this agreement. This form allows up to 4 buyers on the contract. Okay, and then below that is information about the brokerage. Self-explanatory. You guys know how to fill that out. So that's the BBRA. Any further questions, come see me or any of the other Realty One Group managers. And let's have a great day. Bye-bye.